Welcome, everybody. I'm Lily. I'm with the team at Sanctuary of Tao, and I'm here today with Stuart Alve Olson. He has been studying, practicing, translating, and writing about Taoism for over 30 years. He's written over 30 books on the subjects, including 4 books on the I Ching, which he's going to share with us today. So with that said, I would like to introduce Stuart. Welcome, Stuart.
The I Ching, what an enormous subject. The I Ching has 3 streams of use. One is divination. It's trying to show you the patterns of what can occur, a prediction of future events. Its second use and stream, so to speak, is that of calculation, meaning you can calculate with the I Ching, about finding lost objects, calculating patterns that you want to start a business, etc. This is where Feng Shui came in. Feng Shui borrowed from this calculation idea that there's patterns that if we follow them and learn how to calculate them, we get good end results. And then the I Ching, its third stream, is a book of wisdom. Just reading it will lend some wisdom to you. The I Ching is phenomenal in that respect. I kind of like to think of it as one of the very first scriptures ever written in human history. My initial introduction to the I Ching actually was when I was like 17 years old, a long time ago. And a girlfriend of mine bought me the Wilhelm Baines translation of the I Ching, the big gray book. I had no idea or any inkling of what this thing was about. All I knew is that as I paged through it, I saw really cool statements like "Let your magic tortoise fly," dragons without heads, and all those kind of little oracle statements, and it intrigued me. I had no understanding of it or any idea what any of it meant. And I certainly did not understand back then that this was a translation done on the Confucian viewpoint of the I Ching. But I knew nothing of that at the time. So over the years, I sat and I played with this, periodically in and out, looking at this book. And then it was much later on, when I was like 25 years old, I came across an I Ching book by Da Lu, who at the time I didn't know, but my teacher, Master Liang, was living with him in New York. And it was a much smaller work, and in many ways and again, I didn't really recognize it, but it had more Taoist influence than Confucian influence. So that this kind of had caught my interest over the span of time. And it wasn't until actually I went to City of 10,000 Buddhas that I can actually say that I got really serious about the I Ching. What happened there was the teacher, Xuanhua, I found out, had, during his earlier life, memorized the I Ching. And he also did some forecasting to help provide money for temples and such. In light of that, once that really intrigued me, that he had delved so deeply into the I Ching. And again, I don't know that much, but now I'm really starting to look at it with a more serious kind of eye, so to speak. And I also start my process while I was there of memorizing it. At this stage, I'm getting a kind of a conglomerate of things, because now I'm hearing about Chinese astrology. I knew about it before, but now I'm hearing about it in a different way. And everything just got more serious for me. While I was at City of 10,000 Buddhas. I wouldn't say I had any expertise in it, but then while I was there also was a guest teacher that came by the name of Professor Lin, who was quite famous in his field of Feng Shui. And he came and taught there, and I was able to sit in on those classes. For the most part, most of them were way over my head at that point. But nonetheless, I picked up certain ideas. And it gave me a greater clarity about what we were looking at with all this I Ching things and the astrology of it. So that was kind of the initial thing, other than the fact that I had returned to Minnesota and I had decided at that point to translate the entire I Ching, which I did. And I went to the library every day, found a nice quiet place to sit with my books, and I translated the entire I Ching. I learned an immense amount about the I Ching by doing that. But it also got me much more interested in reading other works. There was a man by the name of Alex Kai that wrote the Taoist Books of Days and the 11th Wing, and I found those really informative and inspiring. And as everybody knows, there's lots and lots of I Ching books out there. Now, and I start reading and picking up more on Chinese books. And this is where I start learning more about the fact that there is a division between the Confucian ideals of the I Ching and what Taoists are. The I Ching is probably the oldest extant book in history. It goes all the way back to the Zhou dynasty, which is, just roughly saying here, 2000 BCE. So it's really quite old. All the way through Chinese culture, we see influences of the I Ching. In fact, from the I Ching, we come across and start seeing the development of the 12 earthly branches, the 10 heavenly stems, Chinese astrology. And it's real, and all the way through history, right up to the time of Mao Zedong. He himself made use of the I Ching. So it's really been a very profound work as to not only its use, but how it was integrated into Chinese culture. In fact, so much so that it's an easy statement to make, to say that in Chinese culture, anything that is developed, if it could not be correlated to the 8 trigrams of the I Ching and the 5-element theory, it had no worth to the Chinese. Therefore, this I Ching is critical to the development of Chinese culture in general. Early on, the I Ching was pretty much kept within the aristocrat, royal kind of realms, areas of Chinese culture. There were people called the Feng Shui, method masters. They dealt with the cracks in tortoise shells or cracks within ox bones to determine an answer to a question. The I Ching was used for many, many things that an empire had to deal with. They talk about this mythical emperor Fu Xi seeing a tortoise come out of the river with these 8 trigrams on its shell, and that he developed the whole idea of the I Ching. Now that's most likely not true, considering that trigrams didn't appear until much later. It was really a development of what they call the whole map and low maps. That's these series of dots, connected dots, which actually correlate and look very similar to the idea of constellation patterns. And this was done by a man called Yu the Great. And he's the one that actually is the source of Feng Shui. All Feng Shui bases its theories on the I Ching. A man by the name King Wen, whole history there. He was never really a king, but he was supposed to be one, so they called him King Wen. And he had a nephew by the name of Duke of Zhou. And between the two of them, King Wen wrote what we now call the prediction or the judgment, and designed the trigrams and the hexagrams. And then his nephew came along and did the commentary on each of the lines, 6 lines of every hexagram. And so that was kind of the original way of looking at this, that we're looking at everything from, cracks in tortoise shells to Yu the Great with his Ho and Low maps, and then into King Wen with the trigrams, and then for the first time an actual I Ching book appears in the Zhou dynasty. So it has a very long history, and there are numerous people throughout Chinese history connected to its development. Now, from this, we develop from the I Ching not only Feng Shui, but the whole idea of Chinese astrology, dealing with the calendar in Chinese society. The calendar is based on the 12 earthly branches and the 10 heavenly stems. Those are all correlated to the I Ching as well. There's a 60-year cycle, and that is correlated with the images of the I Ching. Now, when I was with Master Leon, I had to memorize the Taijiquan classic. And at the end of it, there's a statement about the correlation of the I Ching and 5 elements with Tai Chi. And as I got into that, I discovered that indeed, I'll put it up. It was this book that I did called Tai Chi According to the I Ching, which shows how the images and how Tai Chi was formed based on the I Ching. And to me, that just fascinated me, that there was this absolute concrete correlation. Using the I Ching, I started doing, and my pattern of the postures was taken from the I Ching. And then myself and Patrick Gross put together this book called Tai Chi Changes, which is basically a form book, but it's showing all the more intricate ideas of its correlations with the I Ching. Really a cool book. In between time, I have done 2 other books, the Book of Sun and Moon, Volume 1 and Volume 2, which really goes into, Volume 2 is the translation of the actual I Ching text. Volume 1 is more based on a lot of the theories and correlations of the I Ching. The name I Ching, first, I means change, can also mean easy, but its derivation shows in its character the sun and the moon. Jing means classic, book, scripture, whatever. But the character I prefer calling it the Book of Sun and Moon, not the Book of Change, even though that's accurate. Could also accurately call it the Book of Easy, which may be why, when you think about it, King Wen got rid of all the dots, the black and white dots and the little patterns, and turned them into these simple broken and yin lines. Yeah, the book got easier. the whole working of the I Ching became easier. So it is, you know, you can call it the classic of easy. It could also be this change, because the character was also used to describe a chameleon changing colors. But its origin, it comes from the two radicals of sun and moon. And I think that you know, that is change in and of itself. The sun and constantly from sun to moon, moon to sun. And the I Ching is based on sun and moon characters too, yin and yang. So shortly, I'll be coming out with a book called The Logic of the I Ching. It's something I've worked on really hard over the years. And that's because they always keep talking. I've always heard this thing about the I Ching is a grouping of random images, and it's not. There's actually a way of seeing. It's kind of mathematical structure. You know, different systems of what I would call divination throughout history have been based on this idea of seeing a pattern or a track. And our universe is filled with them. Even this is why, you know, astrology, if you think about astrology, it's looking at constellation, at stars, which are like tracks. They are patterns that repeat themselves. And there's an energy to that. And so we learn how to interpret them with the I Ching. All of nature, all of it, is filled with patterns. You know, and to give that in a really broad sense, you can look at the seasons. The seasons are a pattern, and we can follow them. So the I Ching is laying out these 6-lined images, the 64 of them, whether, you know, you can deal with changing lines, et cetera, you end up with 10,000 variations of a pattern to a certain situation. Working with the I Ching, one of its side effects and one of its greater ones is it helps build your intuition. You know, by dealing with this oracle and these hexagrams, etc., you have to exercise your intuition. And that's a really powerful thing for people to exercise, because we normally don't. We normally don't go through life trying to foresee events. You know, like, if I do this, what's going to be the end result? That type of intuition. Most of us just go through life, you know, reacting to desires and, you know, situations and circumstances. Whereas the I Ching teaches you to look at it in a much more kind of calculating way, like a tracker. When a tracker wants to go out and say he's hunting a bear, he's looking for bear tracks. He's not looking for squirrel tracks, or he's specifically looking for bear tracks. And when he finds them, he can follow them. That, in essence, is kind of the I Ching, even though it goes well even beyond that. You know, it's like the story of King Wen. When he had a prisoner, he didn't put them in jail. He would put them in a courtyard and draw a circle around them. And that was it. And if they left that circle, he would be able to tell his guards, here's where he went. He could tell by where they left the circle where they were going. And sure enough, they'd go find him and recapture and put him back in the circle again, till it got to the point where they just didn't leave the circle. Now, is that story true? Well, it's written in history. I suppose there's some truth to it. I don't understand it. I don't not understand how King Wen did that. But it was all based on the I Ching. And that's why I'm saying your intuitive powers grow the more that you use the I Ching. It's not a question of mastering the I Ching. It's really a question of using it to get another view of life. You know, Xuan Hua taught that, you know, you start seeing the trigrams in sit in nature itself. Remember once somebody asked Renoir if he, cast the stocks every time he performed, his I Ching forecasting. And he said, no, he said, because the instant the people walked into the room, I could see the images, even before we asked the question. Now that's intuition. That's pretty phenomenal. And so, when you start thinking in those terms, yes, you can say, a kind of you get really deep into like a spiritual context of this. But really, it's just training of the consciousness, a training of our intuition. If we use it and try to exercise our intuition, we gain a clarity about not only the question asked, but about the answer, and how we should react to it. How should we follow that track, that pattern, in order to end up at the best result? The subject of the I Ching has really kind of overtaken my life. I find periods of my life where I'm just really, really involved with it. And I keep coming back to it constantly. It's interesting that no matter what other books I work on, like internal alchemy books, for example, there's always these correlations that show up about the I Ching. So it's kind of a constant where it gets embedded into almost everything. As much as I have studied it and went through it and torn it apart, I just don't think there's any human being that can go, they fully understand the I Ching. It just keeps developing. In fact, the more that you find out about it, the more you want to ask about it, I guess, or as the Chinese philosophy likes to say, one question an answer raises 10,000 more. That's kind of how I feel about the I Ching.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Stuart.